Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us. I hope out there this is going to be a very interesting webinar for you and your businesses. We're going to be looking at how you protect your data, whether it's client data, whether it's staff data, and also how do you protect yourself against the recent cyber attacks, and what do you do if you are a target of a cyber attack? How do you disaster recover, and how do you come out fighting strong? I am so lucky today. I've been fortunately joined today by Vijay Rathore from Grant Thornton, Jackie, who is head of our commercial department, and Sean, who is a very knowledgeable GDPR data protection solicitor. I'd just like them to say a quick, brief hello and give you a bit of background. Vijay.
Good morning, everyone. Very nice to see you. And Karen, thank you for that introduction. So I'm Vijay Rathore, and I'm a partner at Grant Thornton, and I have the honour of leading what we call our digital forensics group. So once upon a time, I was a barrister and a solicitor, and I worked as a commercial litigator for quite a few years. Learned my trade there effectively as an investigator, and started to shape my world around digital investigations. From private practice, I went over to the FCA, and I was leading one of the enforcement teams there, effectively investigating large banks and financial disputes. But in my spare time, I had a great passion and hobby around hacking and technology and cyber issues. So about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to jump ship and blend my two interests together and effectively work in the space of cyber investigations. So these days, I lead the team that is very much focused around data breaches, helping and supporting our clients, fixing the issues when they've lost data, and also helping to keep them safe or figure out what actually happens if and when the data has disappeared.
That's great. I mean, I know you have a lot of experience in the large established companies, that some of them have been under attack recently. So it'll be interesting to take that knowledge and help disseminate for the small and medium businesses as well. So really looking forward to that today. Jackie, perhaps you could let everybody know what you do.
Hi, my name's Jackie. I head up the company commercial department at City Law Firm. I work predominantly with startup, scale up, technology companies, and in other industries as well. But those who are working in innovative technology businesses. Sean is one of the commercial solicitors within the department, and I think she'll introduce herself as to what her speciality is.
Yes, so my name's Sean Stevens. I'm one of the commercial solicitors at a City Law Firm. My experience is primarily in data and also technology. So I came into a data protection space around 10 years ago. I had an interesting case with regard to CCTV and an employee being monitored without his consent by CCTV. And that came from an employment sphere. And then more recently, I have conducted a number of seminars since 2016 on the GDPR, and seminars in the Canary Wharf Tower to a number of developers, and looked at data in different industries and different spaces. So I've worked for regulated bodies, for example, credit unions and accountancy firms, and I have also worked for surveyors and law firms and in a range of different industries.
Thank you, Sean. I mean, just to let you know out there, so City Law Firm and Grant Thornton are very entrepreneurial. So we love working with disruptive technology. We love working with how you take a traditional firm and integrate technology into that. So we do understand from small, medium, large businesses the demands you have. And I suppose it's an interesting time right now because a lot of people are working remotely. So the agile tech-enabled firms are going to do really well. And the companies that have maybe been less or been more resistant to this are going to have to learn quickly, right? So, I mean, what I want to throw it out there, how do you actually protect yourselves at the moment? So you've got all these employees working at home, different devices, perhaps not with the same firewalls. How do you minimize risk right now? I mean, Vijay, you're probably the number one to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Karen. I hate the expression, we've all received a million emails over the last few weeks about the new normal and exceptional times. And from a cyber perspective, I think we are actually living in exceptional times, and there is a new normal. Grant Thornton, it has some 3,000, 4,000 employees across the UK. And fortunately, we were able to migrate the majority of our employees into a remote working or an agile fashion pretty much overnight. Now, that's because we'd effectively anticipated the ability to have an agile working environment. We like our people to work wherever they're most comfortable. But obviously doing it when you're back slightly against the wall and suddenly you've got everybody migrating to Teams and you've got 1,000 people logging on and stretching the infrastructure, it is a challenging time. Perhaps, no doubt for many of you, many of us, it is going to become the new normal. we don't anticipate using our traditional physical infrastructure in anything like the same way ever again. So we don't anticipate having 3,000 people sitting in one place again, because we've been able to demonstrate that we can actually work efficiently in an agile fashion. And of course, you're hearing about businesses like Google and Facebook and lots of startups and tech companies recognizing that they can actually work even as effectively as they are in an agile fashion, working from home, working on the beach, working wherever you have to. And so I think thinking about the new normal, it presents a great opportunity, but at the same time, it's presenting a really fantastic attack surface, as we refer to it, for the bad guys. And if you just think about the traditional or the very obvious types of concerns, from an IT perspective, you're now thinking about people logging in. Looks like Sean's in a kitchen. You know, we're logging in from home, we're logging in from iPads, we're logging in from mobile devices. Suddenly you've got people not sitting in one physical location, but it appears that you've got people logging in from France and Germany and South Africa. Now, usually you might think that that's unusual. You might think about what we call the impossible travel problem, where it looks like somebody should be in Birmingham but is actually based in South Africa. That amount of travel seems to be impossible, but suddenly that's the new normal, because maybe we're all just all shacked up in random places. And so we're saying that our IT teams are being stretched because they're now having to think about a very dramatically different set of circumstances. People are logging in from different devices using different technology platforms. Sometimes it's Zoom, sometimes it's Teams, sometimes it's one of the GoToMeeting type platforms. And so we're thinking of very rapidly evolving how we're logging in. And then you've got those personal devices, so what we refer to as the BYOD, bring your own device, and it's colloquially sometimes called the bring your own disaster problem. And you've got all of these happening all at the same time. So we're seeing our clients going through what might be in the best of times a 6-month transformation, suddenly doing that in 6 weeks, which means that mistakes are going to happen. And you're going to have an oversight, you're going to misconfigure something, a firewall rule is going to be missed, or you're going to forget to enable a VPN, you know, all of these jargon buzzwords. But unfortunately, it does mean that just one tiny little entry point is being opportunistically investigated by the bad guys, and it's all an open door for them. But it's not all doom and gloom. So obviously some good things as well as some of the challenges that come with it.
So Sean, obviously we need to engage the employees, make sure they understand the processes and policies. What advice would you give to employers out there actually how to enforce and monitor all this?
Well, I believe this is very unusual times, obviously, for businesses, and businesses do need to be extra vigilant about cyber issues and cyber attacks. And as everyone is at home, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on basically the cyber hackers are going to be able to use this situation for their advantage. So companies do need to be extra vigilant. They need to have robust cybersecurity, robust IT. They need to have their cyber policies in place, so their GDPR policies. And if there is a data breach, they need to act on this really quickly. The Information Commissioner says 72 hours to report a data breach. So they need to be really up to date with the law, what they need to do, have their policies in place, and basically they need to make sure that they're following these policies. So for example, a data breach policy, as I said, this is a time when cyber attacks are absolutely going to be more, they're going to be more common, basically.
So I suppose rather than just having a document, we also be really careful that we need to train our staff more. We need to make this information accessible to them. You know, and obviously they're not in a room anymore for a simple training coach. We're going to have, whether it's a server, whether you email, whether we have a Dropbox, you know, you actually have to get your message to your staff to get them on board. And I think it's really important for them to have a point of contact. Who do they report concerns to at the moment? And I also find it worrying that people might think, oh gosh, I might have downloaded something wrong. I might have done something wrong. They're not going to go and speak directly to their manager or IT contact, sorry. So we kind of need to give them that comfort, right? To say, I'm a bit worried here, help, can we look into this before it's too late? Do you agree?
I would just also say that staff also need to be aware of the consequences of what they're doing as well. So it's very well putting in place policies which sometimes are just a piece of paper. And I think Karen's already touched on this, but they have to be workable policies. They have to relate to your business and be relevant to what you need. It's not just a downloadable template. It has to work for you. And so, yes, bringing in other factors. Who is a point of contact? How do you escalate matters? Because one of the big issues with regards to reporting is it's the poacher term gamekeeper, the person who is overseeing the infrastructure. So the person who is usually the IT, the in-house IT or dealing with the IT is the person typically that you're reporting the IT issues to. So somebody who may have inadvertently caused the issue is the person that you're then having to turn to and say, oh, something's gone wrong. So just having a step back, just from a commercial perspective as well, some of the issues I think that employers should be looking at is from the insurance perspective. Do you have suitable insurance in place for the data that's being transmitted to people who are now at home, who may not be in the UK, who may be in countries outside of the EU that have got more vulnerabilities and more issues? Also, taking the issue away from cyber completely and thinking, well, actually, there's also a risk that if we're using more portable devices, so I'm sitting on a laptop here, and I have things on my mobile phone. We're becoming more alert to cyber issues, but don't forget the threat of other types of crimes where somebody may steal your devices. So not leaving your phone on the bus. I know nobody's really traveling on the bus at the moment, but if you're enjoying the outdoors, make sure that you have your devices with you. So VJ saying people might be sitting on the beach working. Well, if you're doing that, just as making sure that you don't leave confidential papers laying around, remember that the devices that you have access to significant information about people, but also vulnerabilities, because if you don't have proper security measures, somebody steals your phone, what untold harm could arise from that? I think that goes back to mapping out the risks, because people were very good at the early stages of GDPR in looking at risk profiles, analysing their businesses. With this new normal, which I also don't like to throw around, but all businesses should now look at the new risk profiles that's presented by a majority of their staff home working for probably the foreseeable future, and maybe and even if it's not full-time home working, then the idea that there may be staggered workforce relocated and redeployed. So I would encourage everybody to readdress, pull out those maps that were done maybe 2 years ago now, and say, is this still relevant to now and to this new normal?
Yeah, and a lot of companies would never have bring your device policies because you were always provided with that technology, especially in the more established businesses. And, a lot of people suddenly left the building and probably are using their own laptop. So like you say, it's almost going back to basics and redoing the risk assessment because things are different. So I suppose, we need to make sure these companies do understand, start from scratch, update your policies. But it goes back to me that you do actually need to engage your. So with regards to a cyber attack, if it does happen, how do you react? What's the best process?
Karen, I can perhaps pick that up in the first
Okay.
instance. And if I can give you some more of the doom and gloom, perhaps, just to lay it on really thick, but we're tracking something like this is no typo, but we're tracking something like a 30,000% increase in COVID-related cyber attacks, opportunistic attacks, just over the last 3 months. And you've got something like Google. So Google is stopping 18 million hoax emails a day just related to COVID-related cyber incidents. So this is not on top of the millions that they're stopping about everything else. But you can see that, again, this horrible new normal means that the attackers are evolving their infrastructure very, very rapidly in order to be able to take advantage of the new way that we're working. So again, you've got things like doctored Zoom links, doctored or malicious Teams links. Please click on this link here in order to be able to download the new HR policy, the new holiday policy, the new furlough scheme policy. And of course, you click on the link because you're inquisitive. You enter your password because, of course, that's what you normally do. And suddenly you've given away the keys to the kingdom, whether that's your own business or a third-party supply chain infrastructure and everything related to it. And again, we're seeing related themes around the traditional payment redirection. So your supplier is going to say, I normally deliver milk to your account, to your premises. Do you mind moving your payment over from Barclays to NatWest? Because of course we're having to move our infrastructure during COVID, and of course it's actually just a payment redirection scam. It's happening on the increase, and again, because everybody's expecting a little bit of flux around the time of COVID, you're thinking slightly less about it. You know, your guard is somewhat lowered. Just a couple of days ago, Dominic Raab obviously was coming out and saying that the UK government in particular has seen clear evidence of particularly dangerous cyber criminals targeting organisations during this time. So if we were just thinking about COVID, it's happening and it's dramatically on the increase. But there is an ugly fact related to this, which even before COVID, the average amount of time that it takes a business to figure out that it suffered a cyber incident is around 190 days. Now that's on average. Some organisations are going to be very well set up to figure this out within a handful of hours. Sean mentioned that 72-hour time window from the point at which you figure it out. But again, that's on average. And we've seen clients that have been compromised for 5 years without even realising that the bad guys were sucking data away from them and using it for the bad purposes. So we've seen, again, there's been a bandwagon jumping on the EasyJet planes. British Airways had significant attacks. And then you've also had, I've had clients that range from tiny little organisations that have suffered a ransomware attack all the way through to multinationals. And we experience that, ironically, the smaller you are, the worse the pain. Now, a large organisation like British Airways and EasyJet, they're going to have effectively what my legal colleagues on the call can refer to, the accountability principle. They're likely to have built in appropriate system and technical and organisational safeguards as expected by GDPR, and so you would expect them to be quite secure and business resilient. But actually, the majority of our clients aren't, and they don't expect them to be the ones under the cosh when the bad guys attack them. So a client of mine, a small accountancy firm, just 10 people in the business, suffered a ransomware attack, and ransomware attacks are considered to be extremely prevalent and relatively easy to resist. And yet it caused complete operational failure. And she's now having to write to every one of her clients and say, whoops, we've lost all of your accounting data, your banking data, your personally identifiable information, your mortgage information, everything that really endangers the confidence to share your private information with this accountancy firm. And so the smaller you are, perhaps the greater the proportion of impact. And so resilience really does start ideally in that security by design, resilience by design. Yeah, I mean, they're great buzzwords that we thought about during GDPR 2 years ago, but what about today? Really, how do you think about use of personal devices? And so we mentioned losing devices and encryption of devices. Honestly, I like to think about it from the context of, if I lose one of these, if I forget it on the bus, there should be nothing in there that the bad guys can access. So I should be comfortable throwing my operational devices, my laptop, my iPad, my phone, anywhere on the road, and there should be multiple levels of encryption. It's free. That idea of what we call multi-level, multi-factor authentication is typically free. But once you enable that, you're pretty much 90+% secured against the traditional cyber attacks. And in enabling these relatively cheap, no cost, low pain types of thought processes and practical impacts will really dramatically reduce your risk profile. That's thinking about the cyber attack posture. I can go into perhaps resilience, but what about my colleagues? Sean, Jacqueline, any thoughts from your side?
Well, I would just say that it's really important to have in disaster recovery processes and procedures in all your relationships that you have in place. So if you start thinking about that at the beginning of any contractual relationship, then what if something goes wrong? How I work with a lot of clients who may have outsourced development, so dealing with technological designs, infrastructure, and what happens if their servers fail? What happens if there's an attack, or there's a form of denial of service, or something happens that means they are unable to continue to maintain that operation for you? Often in the development sphere, they don't like to share that because it's considered to be very sensitive information, because they're essentially saying what competitor they're going to be handing over the reins to allow it. But these are really coming to the forefront now in terms of, if something goes wrong, is my business able to adapt and is able to is my business able to adapt? And that, I think COVID-19 has really brought out that spirit in a lot of businesses, because they've had to adapt because of COVID-19, So it's really a look at every single aspect of your business, not just the cyber. I know we're talking about cyber today, but it's important to look at disaster recovery as a whole, of which I think cyber risks for all businesses, whereas probably 6 months ago some businesses would say, well, absolutely, my business is 90% run run offline, so the risk of cyber is quite small. Whereas now, really, that shift, and we've seen maybe smaller retail establishments, for example, pivot their businesses from being a bricks and mortar shop where predominantly they're open trading, to pivoting that and setting up websites and setting up online transactions. So, and as VJ said, something that may have taken 6 to 12 months to plan, design, consider and lay out has been done in a very short space of time. So it's worth having a look at and thinking, fine, I know I need to survive commercially, but what if something goes wrong? Because as VJ has already alluded to, we're not talking about a pure financial loss in terms of if there is a cyber attack. We're talking about damage to your reputation, damage within the industry, and you may not ever be able to get back from where you end up, because if your business is brought to its knees, what confidence are you going to be able to give to your customers? So really put in place, I would say, proper measures. Have a set aside time to work on your business rather than in your business, and use the opportunity now during this lockdown to really try and focus on that.
Sean, I mean, you remember years ago we had the mystery shoppers go into the restaurants and the retail and actually see how your employees were delivering. I mean, is that something perhaps that businesses should be considering? Testing the resilience, testing their employees, doing like a mystery shopping hack to see how the employees react? Because, I'm not a technology person, but I employ a lot of people and I'm trying to be very careful with my policies. But I don't know what you know. I don't know if you're following it. I don't even know how I'd react if I had my computer attacked. Do you think that's going too far, or?
I think there definitely needs to be ongoing training, and obviously that's what the ICO expects, that there is not just training at the beginning, but there's always training, and employees will always be updated along the way. So yes, they do need to know what to do in these types of situations. And Jackie is completely right. Reputation is key. And if you lose that reputation, that can be even more damage than having a fine from the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. So training your employees and having that really good level of training from there's different companies that facilitate that, whether that be online or in person, is really important in this critical time.
I suppose we also have to think about all these staff that are on furlough at the moment as well. When we start reintroducing them back to the business, they're coming back to a very different business. So you wouldn't suddenly change the dynamics, you've changed the equipment they're using, you've got all these new policies. Getting them on board, it's not just about, here, I'll read this manual. It's training, but it's also maybe embodying it back into them, making them feel part of this process. Because we can only as a company survive if our team actually understand it, embrace it, and want to admit mistakes, want to help with it. So that's going to be another challenge when we do start staggering back, right?
But staff are typically the one of the key vulnerabilities in any business. So making sure they're properly trained, there's the human element of the cyber attack. It's very, very rare, and VJ, I'm sure will be able to correct me, but it's very, very rare that the cyber attacks are purely doesn't have any interaction. It's usually clicking on a link or some sort of redirect or something, so involving that human element. I was just going to go back to Karen's last question regarding looking at ways to like a mystery shopper type arrangement, and I was going to bring maybe VJ back into that, because and the use of white hats and around that, and see whether or not what his view is on that and using it at this time.
Yeah, absolutely, guys, and I agree with everything that's been said there. And exactly as Jacqueline was saying, it's an unfortunate statistic, but the majority of data breaches, cyber incidents that are going to occur, are unfortunately caused by you and I. So effectively, you've got the hardware, and you're going to think about configuration, software, you're going to think about it. Unfortunately, us as the horrible wetware, we are commonly the greatest attack surface, and that may be malicious insiders, or it may be just inadvertent and accidental breaches and leaks. So people using a BCC, using a CC instead of a BCC is an obvious example. But then you think about encryption. Again, in your practice as well, we've had barristers who have been disbarred because they accidentally left an unencrypted laptop open with client files on there. And again, you can think about it from the most practical and pragmatic issues all the way through to sophisticated cyber attacks on organizations. It's not always some sinister nation state or somebody wearing a hoodie and sitting in basements as a coordinated attack. Sometimes it's just opportunistic. And in fact, that's what I would encourage you to think about most. It's unlikely that you're going to have a rogue nation state trying to bring down your relatively small business, small to medium business. But at the same time, it's going to be things like you've got scanners that are continuously checking every single computer that's ever connected to the internet. And if they find an open port, they're going to probe around and see what you've got. PII, sensitive data, confidential information, credit cards, passwords. Passwords are hugely valuable. And going back a little bit, Karen, to a point you mentioned earlier, again, the traditional statistic that you hear people like me talk about are that 9 out of 10 businesses have been attacked. Probably the other one just hasn't figured it out. But given that it's almost assumed that you're going to suffer some kind of cyber probing, some kind of cyber challenge, you will be remembered not for the fact that you suffered an incident, but you'll be remembered for the way you dealt with it. So really, your posture in terms of dealing with your customers, dealing with regulators, dealing with the data, your public posture, your communication process is what you will be remembered for. The fact that you've suffered an incident is almost kind of a given these days. I would encourage you to think about which bank has not suffered an incident, which airline has not suffered an incident, which organization have you not had an email from. WH Smith, Amazon, Ocado, all of them have suffered something. But think about who dealt with it well. We've all seen the TalkTalk and the Carphone Warehouse that went dramatically badly. And so actually the easiest things that allow you to be on the front foot are the ones that cost you almost nothing. Think about pre-canned communication statements. Those statements that say, we take your data very seriously, we apologize, we're investigating, we're working with experts. Those types of things, do in peacetime, do right now, do it before it becomes a problem, because those are the things that re-engender trust and get your clients back on side. If they don't, they're going to think about moving their business elsewhere. And then getting your human attack surface, your employees to think about these things, again, exactly as Jacqueline said, that's really valuable. And so we've seen the ICO say that you're getting a little bit of a slightly more loosey-goosey approach from the regulator because of COVID and because of transformation we're ongoing. But that's not going to be it's not going to be carte blanche. They're eventually going to get back into the mode of issuing those large fines for failing to adapt and to embrace COVID and the new working environment. So we've got to encourage our staff, think about the new working environment, be live to the risks, and if necessary, as you say, Karen, reissue your IT and your HR policies around working from home, configuration of BYOD, configuration of strong passwords, etc. So there's actually, if you look on the National Cybersecurity website, there's what they call the 10 steps. Trivially easy to do. Things like, have you got a virus killer? Have you got a strong password? They will cost you nearly nothing. But by embracing those relatively free and low-cost solutions, you're going to dramatically decrease your attack surface and stop you becoming the next headline on the newspapers.
With regard to that link, I'm going to put that on the website next to this webinar, because I think that'd be really useful for people out there, especially if you or yourselves are not tech savvy. Even if you've got an IT team, it's also useful for a business owner to understand that. I mean, one of the questions I would have as a business owner and employer, I want to be very positive with my team, train them, give them policies, clear guidance. Then there's also that fine balance of what if they do something wrong and try to cover it up because they're nervous? What if they have downloaded something they shouldn't? So a lot of people were saying, do we fire them for gross misconduct? Do we actually take disciplinary action? Or is that very difficult now remotely? How do we actually go in and take that data back in the computer if we do dismiss an employee? That's a very challenging time that I've had with a couple of clients at the moment. They do want to dismiss a client, but they have their laptop, they have their data. We have to still enforce, we still have to empower ourselves to make sure as an employer we're acting. But it is something you have to think about commercially now, right, guys?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a really interesting point, because employers need to have control of that data, but also if there has been a problem and an employee has done something they shouldn't have, which we can all do because we're only human, it's really important that the employee has that line to go to. So have a line manager or have that relationship where they understand that you as a business have a data reporting booklet, and that you will report all your breaches. And not all breaches need to be reported to the ICO, but they do need to be recorded in a booklet. And your employees need to understand that they will have to contact the CEO or contact the data protection officer, contact the right person to make sure that that log is there, and that the data protection officer or the data privacy manager, whoever the company appoints, can make that decision. And it's important for the employees to have that faith, have that trust, and have that relationship with their employer where they feel they can go to their employer, and they're not going to obviously necessarily be in trouble for gross misconduct, but we have to have this openness and this transparency, and employees need to feel that their employer is on board with that, understands that. And then what we need to do is just work together in a business as a team to deal with any data issues, because that's really, really important.
No, I found, sorry, Vijay.
No, well, I was going to say, I mean, building upon what Sean said there, having experienced this in perhaps even my own team, where a colleague made a mistake. So in a business that I worked in, a colleague made a mistake, and effectively they sought to cover up the mistake. And they got dismissed, not for the fact they made the mistake, but for the cover up. And I would strongly encourage business practices to live in a world of trust and not in fear. So effectively, if you've made those types of mistakes, I can give you another example of a slightly distasteful example, but a client of ours who had a major data breach at the start of this year. Unfortunately, their head of IT was downloading pornography on his work computer, and that was effectively an opportunistic attack. It downloaded malware onto his computer and brought down the entire infrastructure. Now, it's better for him to admit that and reduce the time window it takes to contain the problem, effectively trying to fix the problem and stem the flow of problematic information. In the circumstances, it was buried in the paperwork. He didn't tell anybody, and it caused months and months and millions of pounds worth of harm. Now, it's better to admit it and to contain it, to fix it. But in the circumstances, obviously, that chap is no longer in the business. And so exactly as Sean and Jacqueline have said there, thinking about a healthy approach to this is really important. And again, live in a place of trust. It's going to happen to everybody. Everybody clicks on some link, but it's better to live in a place of trust and have a communication channel and a protocol that allows you to manage this stuff. But I will be slightly contentious though, and exactly as Sean said, you should have your risk register and you should have a booklet that allows you to track your risks. But I would strongly encourage anybody who goes into these types of situations, pick up the phone to Sean, Jacqueline, pick up the phone to your law firm, your legal counsel, because there's a very fine art between recording too much information and recording too little. In the sense that I've seen clients of mine who have sent me emails saying, the CEO of the business has been sending me emails saying, Vijay, we knew this was going to happen. We should have spent more on our infrastructure. This was absolutely, it was impossible that this wasn't going to be a problem for us. And I have to pick up the phone to them and say, well, look, from a legal privilege perspective, from a litigation perspective, you may well want to think about being a little bit more cautious about what you're putting pen to paper on. So pick up the phone to your legal counsel, pick up the phone to Sean, and start to put legal privilege around this, because obviously if any of this becomes litigious, then it can be very, very problematic if you've written too much too quickly.
It was also interesting, I was asked to discuss Zoom bombing actually last week, which is something I've only just heard about. So I've now learned all the technological aids to prevent all of that. But I was speaking to people that were saying, because sadly it's really awful, they're putting pornography through the Zoom and actually dazzling you with some awful imagery. Now, obviously you report that, you help Zoom and the police target it. But what my concern about these things was, if you are a junior member of staff on a Zoom call and that happens to you, you're then concerned whether child pornography is on your work laptop. You're then very concerned about reporting that, because will they believe you about what actually happened? So it goes back to what we're all saying, is communication, trust is key. So I need my employees to understand there are strict processes and policies. I will monitor and enforce it, but I'm here to help. And if something like that happens, you have to take a screenshot, as horrible as it is, you need to report it. But I feel that we need to start investing time in our people now and say, we understand you're sat in a bedroom or a kitchen on a works computer, you're trying to work this new technology, things like this could happen. And I mean, ridiculously, my son jumped onto my laptop to download an Wikipedia thing. And all of a sudden, an alarm started going off, the computer's flashing, we're both panicking, we're trying to turn the computer off. Now, if I hadn't have been there, would he have come and told me, I've damaged your work computer? This is an 8-year-old boy. But I saw that in him thinking, I've done something I shouldn't, whereas he hadn't, you know, he just went onto Wikipedia. So I think it's really, really important that we have this education process. And I'm worried that there's going to be too much like passing the blame and too many sticks around. It'll be interesting to see how the media start dealing with this now, because I think as a company, is it our fault because we didn't do it enough? Is it the employee's fault because they did something? We can't pass blame. We've just got to be positive, right? How do we learn from it and how do we come out? So, I mean, going on to that, let's be positive for everybody out there. We've learned what to do, how to enforce it, monitor it. What are your recommendations coming out of lockdown to kind of evolve your strategy and make yourself more resilient so you're on top? Let me start with VJ. What would your top recommendations be right now?
Yeah, excellent. Some very interesting examples there, Karen. And look, you know, I hate being the fear mongerer here. You know, again, I have a huge amount of respect for hackers. I have to say, you know, I was a poor hacker once upon a time, but they're massively curious, massively intellectually curious, massively ambitious in the sense that they will continue to try. And it's typically one of the characteristics which, you know, is often emphasised about those that have got that almost OCD style. This is the white whale that I'm going to trap. I'm going to break into Zoom. I'm going to break into Teams, whatever it may be. And so I have a lot of intellectual respect for them, but you need to understand your adversary here. And actually then what you realize is that a huge amount of this is opportunistic. So think about the ways that you can get the most bang for buck. You know, that 80-20 rule, where stuff that costs you almost nothing. Things, for example, like, you know, Sean's working in a kitchen. So again, I would strongly recommend sending out a little missive about re-updating or re-reminding people about the IT policy. Be conscious if you've got family, friends, third parties looking over your shoulder, looking through your garden window, etc. And again, it's something that should be part of your kind of standard IT policy, but just send out a little truncated, quite easy to understand summary of effectively your GDPR and your ICO obligations, but effectively summarize your IT policies and say, guys, we encourage you to work from home, sit in the garden, but just be conscious about people looking over your shoulder. Think about getting those 3M privacy shields. Yeah, they cost £5 from Amazon, but very low cost ways to preemptively manage your cyber risk or your governance risk. It's not just about cyber, as Jacqueline said, but then again, what I've seen massively influential is if you find yourself on the other side of the desk from a regulator, from the police, from your customers, by being able to say that you did take proactive steps, you did enforce things like multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, strong IT policies. Again, none of this costs you a huge amount, but by being able to say that we're on the front foot, then you tend to find that the regulators, the police, your customers are much, much more forgiving. Because again, it could happen to anybody. So just make sure that you are not the opportunistic, lowest common denominator victim, and then also show that you've taken some proactive steps. Again, I'm happy to send out some notes. I've got some very easy 10-step bullet points, which I'm happy to share through you, Karen.
Okay, I think we'll put those on the website because that would be really useful. Jackie, have you got any top tips for clients out there?
So my top tip would be pull out your GDPR mapping and your risk assessments that you may have done a couple of years ago. If you haven't done them, I would really suggest it. Now is the best time to have a look at what needs to be covered, looking at your infrastructure, your business, how it's set up in terms of the risks of not just cyber security, but the data protection issues. So knowing what data you handle and going from my perspective, a bottom up approach. So looking at what everybody within your organization is handling, how they're handling that data, why they need that data, and what measures have been put in place. I think now is the best time to be pulling that out and having a look. And I would just say that
Jackie, you're on mute.
Sorry, I accidentally muted you. Another technological issue. I pushed the space bar, sorry. So it's not just a regulatory issue now. Obviously, it is a regulatory issue, and it's not just a concern for reputation. It's also an issue when or if you want to sell the business or take on investment in the future. These are areas of due diligence that any investor or purchaser of your business is going to want to look into. They're going to want to make sure that you've got proper policies in place, and if they are going to be taking over your business at some point in the future, they will be taking on those risks themselves. So if you are looking to package your business to sell, this is of vital importance. So yes, from a regulatory point of view, absolutely you need to be complying with your regulatory issues. As I said earlier, you've got the reputational harm if you're for your customers, but also the longevity and the future proof of your business when you want to expand, if you want to move into different sectors, if you're going to be working with organizations. So a number of my clients are in the technology sphere, and they may be working with very large organizations going forward. So, working with government bodies. Those types of organizations themselves do due diligence and will also want to make sure that you've got proper measures in place. So my bottom line is pull those policies out, pull out all your policies, make sure that what was relevant 10 weeks ago is still relevant to your business now.
Sian, you know what you're going to be doing for a city law firm for the next 2 weeks then, don't you?
Yes, definitely.
What else would you recommend, Sian?
I'd recommend that not only should you have the policies in place, but your employees should understand how they work and how to abide by them. Because we can have policies as businesses and they need to be industry specific. So every policy that I draft is bespokely drafted for that industry and for that business. And the Information Commissioner doesn't want generic policies by companies, or you pull things off the internet and it just doesn't actually do what you're doing. So it's really important that the policies work for you, they're bespokely drafted, they do what they're meant to be doing within your business, and your employees actually understand them and understand how they're meant to be complying with the protection of data, data breach, your privacy standard, your fair processing notices. It's really important that not only there's training, but your employees know how to abide by these policies. And that's what we need to think about as businesses.
Well, there's a lot of information there. Hopefully on the website we're going to have some links. So it's not only just looking at the IT and disaster recovery and the policies, but I think from the key what you're giving everybody out there is communication. Train, understand it yourself, disseminate it clearly, practically, bespokely, and give that message out. And I suppose we've talked a lot about staff. So clearly our employees are at the front line. Let's make sure they know what they're doing, why they're doing it. But also I think the message that you've also given me is do the same for clients. Let them feel the comfort and confidence of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Let them understand the processes and policies we've got in place. And then if something is suspicious, they report it to us, we react. And I see very much what you're saying. It's not about finances and the data per se. It's the goodwill, it's the reputation, it's the confidential information. So I guess we've all got to learn new technology and we've got to adapt our policies. We're a very agile firm, but you've frightened me a little bit now. I'm going to have to go and do my homework today, make sure I'm up to speed. So obviously, if anyone out there wants their policies drafting, I've got Jackie and Sian available to do all of that. And VJ, what do you do with clients? Is that, are you more going in and doing the audit and the consultation? Or do you only like it when it all goes horribly wrong?
Unfortunately, the entire gamut, and especially to Jackie's point, we do a large amount of work around the cyber due diligence, both pre and post acquisition. So if you're going to be making an acquisition, we can come in and look at an organisation and effectively make sure they're healthy. So to the point that you just made there, Karen, actually about your 8-year-old, there are a few places to hide from the computer forensics, and we can generally see everything that's ever happened from a cyber perspective. And Jackie's point, a common concern there is if what you're selling is your intellectual property and all of your intellectual property has been stolen by the Chinese 5 years ago, unfortunately will come to light in a cyber due diligence exercise. So we can conduct those DD exercises for organizations, or in fact we can get your house into order. So we can effectively go through your organizational infrastructure, make sure that there are no obvious signs that you're under current attack. And then what I really encourage is anybody who wants to, we run a 24/7 helpline, so you can pick up the phone anytime you suspect that you might be suffering a cyber incident. I'd encourage you to pick up the phone to Karen, Jackie, Sean first to encourage that privileged perspective. But if you're just a little bit suspicious, if your 8-year-old has done something a bit unusual with your computer, call the 24-hour number. We'd be happy to have the chat. And then to the commentary that my colleagues have made, we really enjoy the cyber war games as well. A lot of my colleagues are military, and there's an hunting military expression that it's better to sweat more in practice than to bleed more in battle. So we really encourage you to practice your cyber posture, your business and resilience posture. And it's a good way to test if your GDPR policies, your data governance policies, your legal policies are all fit for purpose. And again, there's a lot of me talking, but also think everything we're talking about here, it starts and ends also in your third-party supply chain, in the sense that those suppliers that feed into you and you feeding into other suppliers, you are a critical part of that liability chain. So you do need to be thinking about checking the policies and procedures for your suppliers as much as those above you as well. So yeah, I mean, look, we'd really encourage a little war game. Again, we'd be happy to pick up the phone. Often those are at no cost. So we just enjoy effectively helping you test your own metal. So lots to think about, but really, it's not very expensive. A lot of this stuff, is no cost at all. We can just point you at the guidance that the government and we publish, and it's not all doom and gloom. Again, just be alert. Unfortunately, use Boris's expression, stay alert, and it will keep you healthy.
Thank you so much for everybody spending some time today. I hope that was really helpful to everybody out there. There are going to be some links on the website. And I think I'm going to finish by saying, get your house in order. That's pretty much what everybody's told me today. So go out, dust off your processes, policies, and clean your house. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, a pleasure.